Welcome to Soul Searching, the Soul Recruitment Podcast, where we tackle all sorts of great topics in the areas of recruitment, job searching, mindset, technology, marketing, culture, and lots more. It's amazing what you'll pick up. Thanks for joining me. Well, good morning, everyone. Another fantastic episode of Soul Searching, the Soul Recruitment Podcast, episode 53. And today we're going to be chatting all about the power of people and the employee value proposition with Gina Balarin. How are you, Gina?
I'm very well, thank you, Darren. How are you today?
Very, very well. I've pronounced your name correctly, haven't I?
You have. You didn't even have to ask, and you got it right the first time. I'm impressed.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's a topic that is getting more and more airplay all the time, as we were just chatting. And I think it's something that's really important, particularly in a recruitment market that's quite candidate short at the moment. But I thought before we get started, I'll give everybody a little rundown into who Gina is. So Gina Balarin isn't just an inspirational TEDx and keynote speaker, storyteller, and B2B marketing leader. She's a non-executive director who sits on the boards of the Chartered Institute of Marketing and Project Displaced. She likes to collect post-nominals and is an FAMI FCIM chartered marketer with a Masters of Education in Management Communication and is also an MPSA, member of the Professional Speaking Association. The author of The Secret Army, Leadership, Marketing, and the Power of People. She's one of those rare communicators who can absorb huge amounts of information to distill it into meaningful communication that makes positive change happen. Gina is the director of Verbalistics, a Queensland-based marketing communications advisory consultancy. Well, I'm glad I got through all that. It's like a tongue twister.
Well, you did very well indeed, Darren.
Well, welcome to the show, Gina.
Thanks for having me.
So I suppose I'd love to get a little bit more of a backstory. I'd love to hear a bit more about, your story, your history, how you got started in this area. And then later on, we're going to chat a bit more about your TED Talk and your book and everything else. But give us a little bit of a backstory into who Gina is.
If you imagine a girl telling stories to her dolls right at the beginning, and her mum heard her screaming and screaming, she ran in great consternation and said, "What's wrong, Gina?" I looked up at her in great confusion and said, "What do you mean, what's wrong?" She said, "I heard you crying." I said, "That was my dolls." So since the age of 3, I've been a storyteller. Wow. And I realized that the only way to earn a living from writing consistently is to be able to do it for a full-time job. Yep. Now, I've been bitten by the writing bug. I've got one nonfiction book to my name and one unpublished fiction book to my name, and a lot of poems and corporate blog posts and LinkedIn posts and you name it, and I'll write it for B2B content. But it all really came back to that early desire to find what made things meaningful, find the emotion, find the appeal of a story, and to be able to help connect that with an audience. And if you think about it, I've been doing it ever since.
Amazing. Well, you're doing a great job. I love that little intro. That was fantastic. And obviously you are on lots of boards and you do a lot of advisory work and whatnot, but your passion is people. Sounds like your passion is really people.
You've actually hit the nail right on the head. And when I think about it, I guess that's the difference between someone who does content marketing just because they love words and they love information and they love research. For me, content marketing, which is just a fraction of what I do, is not just about the messages. It's about making messages meaningful. And the only way messages can be meaningful is if you understand the communication that's going on between your intended audience and the person who's creating that message in the first place. So when I think about the kind of communication I do that really excites me, I love helping leaders who stand up on stage get prepared to tell their story to the audience. And often that's hard because CEOs are great business people. They can be great ideas people, but they're not always great at standing up and speaking and inspiring an audience. And when you say, "Gina, you must really love people," that was like a light bulb moment for me because I thought, of course I do. That's the difference between someone who writes and someone who seeks to inspire, to change, to make meaning. And I think that's what I do. That's why I love what I do, because if people can communicate effectively, they too can make change happen. And isn't that something that we all really want to do better?
Absolutely. And that's what storytelling is all about. You know, it's always great. It's great to have a good story, but you have to find a way to tell that story so it's going to land, to give you a certain outcome or a particular agenda. Otherwise,
you're absolutely right. I think people forget that with marketing. It's too easy to be siloed and to live in a way where you're focused on, as a marketer, maybe one tactic at a time or one campaign at a time. As a senior leader, you're focused on only the outcomes. And we forget that outcomes, tactics, campaigns, none of these can happen without buy-in from the people who you're trying to talk to.
Love it. Awesome. So obviously today we're going to be chatting all about putting your people first, employee value proposition. You've done a lot of work in this area, a lot of research in this area. So, you know, in the last so many years, it's become really apparent that this is something that's very important, and more companies are really focusing on this area a lot. Why do you think that is? Do you think we're doing a good job? Do you think there's still, you know, what are your thoughts on that?
So when I was thinking about how can I really get into the nuggets of employee value proposition in this conversation today, I came across a great blog post by guild.com.
Okay.
And they actually talk about 5 pillars of an employee value proposition. And we'll presumably cover all of these today, but I think it's nice to think about these as top of mind. Those 5 pillars are compensation, the total rewards package, the career advancement opportunities, and these 2 I really like: contribution to the world as well as culture.
Love that.
So when we think about
a particular rating as to which ones were more important than others, or not really?
Well, my assumption would be that they actually go with compensation first. But in my own research, and as I've talked about in the Secret Army, compensation is not the be all and end all. I know I've worked in organizations, nonprofit organizations, where you are paid peanuts, but your work is so meaningful. And the people that you work with just care so much. And you're wanting to achieve something extraordinary together, that it actually means that you're prepared to work for peanuts, because compensation is not the be all and end all. And in that context, the contribution to the world and the culture are far, far more important than the compensation. I think millennials are definitely voting with their feet in this context too. They're looking at career advancement as a priority, but they're also far more picky and choosy about why they should live with an organization or not. Gone are the days when one person had one job for a lifetime. That is never going to happen again, I don't think.
I think the statistics say that we change our vocation at least 3 to 4 times in a lifetime or something like that.
Well, in marketing context, it's actually far more frequent than that. Marketing CMOs have the shortest tenure of anyone on the C-suite, and the average is, I think, 2.5 years. Wow. And the crazy thing is that if you're working for a B2B business where you need a long time to convince your audience that they actually want to buy your product or service, it might take 6, 9, 12, 18 months before you can make a sale happen, which is really hard for a CMO who wants to make significant changes. They put their changes in place. They've got to wait 18 months for anyone to actually decide they want to buy anything. And a year later, they're gone, moving on to something else. I think it's a very hard position to be in. Yeah. And it's hard for employees, quite frankly, too, when you think about it, because if a sales cycle is really long, how can you feel like you're making a difference? Well, if your remuneration is tied to the organization's corporate performance, of course, which hopefully not everyone's is.
Yes, that is right. And I'm finding the same thing. Like, the more and more people I speak to these days, you know, money is important, compensation is important, but what's the most important, I think, is learning and growth. A lot of people they feel that they're not getting enough opportunity for growth. And people, you know, if you're not growing, you're a robot.
Have you found that's changed over time, Darren, that people are more interested in growth than they were in the past?
Yeah, possibly. I think in the old, like maybe 10 years ago, people were more interested in money. But I think in the last, 5 to 10 years, it seems to be people are more interested in growth and training and certification, particularly in IT, which is the area that I work in. But, compensation used to be number 1 on the list back then. Now it's definitely not. It's important, but a lot of people will still negotiate a little on compensation for other things.
I find that very interesting in terms of a bigger picture way of seeing the world. Have you come across the World Happiness Report?
No, I haven't heard of it.
It's a publication that's launched every year. It's been around for, I think, 10 years or so. I could be wrong on that. Don't quote me. But what it does is it ranks countries by their happiness. And consistently in the last 4 to 5 years, I've been paying really close attention to this. Finland has come out as number 1 or number 2 year on year on year.
Yeah,
Now, the interesting thing about Finnish society is that they are incredibly egalitarian. And salaries, while you can get obviously high and low salaries as any country in the world, there is much less of a difference between the highest of the high and the lowest of the low.
Yep.
Now, I've worked with employees. In fact, I worked at a Finnish company for a while. And I've got a dear friend who I catch up with regularly. And he was telling me how he wasn't too worried about losing a job if he had to, because he would be supported by the government for 18 months after he lost his job. And I nearly fell off my chair.
Yeah.
Because that is unheard of in an environment. Think about the US, where you could literally be let go from one day to the next. There's no such thing as employee security. And a part of me wonders whether employees lose faith in organizations almost as a quid pro quo. Who lost faith first? Yeah. Was it the employees or the employers? And that kind of takes us back to the concept of an employee value proposition, which is, and the essence of this is value. Do you value your employees or not? And I think it's telling that people vote with their feet if they feel like they are unappreciated. And that is one of our fundamental human needs. You know, you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We start with the basics. We have to have food. We have to have security. We have to have a place to live. Yep. Almost every single person on the planet, with, war-torn countries as an exception, obviously, has those basic human needs met. Yeah. So we can climb up and up and up the hierarchy until we get to that pinnacle, which is self-actualization. But I think humans today are searching for something more meaningful. We're searching for value in our lives. And so the employers that make a difference, the employers that can actually attract and, more importantly, retain people, are those that provide people a sense of value, but more importantly, I think a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, a sense of a job that you don't just go to a job to earn an income. We clearly know that people are not valuing compensation that highly anymore. So what else do we go for? Well, a job isn't just a thing that you do. It's actually a way of giving yourself an identity and a purpose.
Yes, it's a way of life. It's an expression. It's everything. And it's so important, as you mentioned, even something as simple as just saying to somebody, great job. There's not enough people that even do that. People can go for 10 years without even hearing somebody say, that was fantastic. Great job. Thank you. It's that simple.
When I first started working, I was a temp as a secretary during my university vacations. And I went along to the temp agencies and did a typing test. And I'll never forget one of the quotes that you had to type in all of the typing tests. The quote was, I could live for a week on a good compliment.
Yep, exactly.
And you know what? Even though that quote was written by someone, I think in the 1800s, some things never change.
Still rings true. Absolutely. And, these days in recruitment anyway, we're always talking about a candidate short market or a talent short market. So good people are very, very hard to find. And employers are doing a better job of retaining their people. And they're really putting a lot of energy into employee value proposition so that when they move through the interview process, the candidate or the potential candidate knows exactly what they're going to get, why they should be saying yes to one job and not another. So maybe let's unpack those 5 key elements of employee value proposition. That'd be great to do.
Well, I think we've kind of covered compensation, the fact that you need to be able to earn a living wage. And unfortunately, the way circumstances are going, it's harder and harder for people at the bottom to be able to earn a living wage, especially with price increases and what's happening with the mortgage rates, the challenges of housing in urban areas. But let's face it, once you've got the basics, what you can do is you can spend more money on stuff that no one really needs or experiences, which are great. But eventually, how much money is too much money? Well, I don't know. A billionaire might argue that there is no such thing as too much money. Right. But I think the research tells us that it doesn't directly correlate with happiness. happiness. More money doesn't necessarily correlate with happiness. I have friends who know people who've actually won the lottery, and 18 months after they won the lottery, they were just as miserable as they were before. In fact, they ended up getting divorced because all they did with that lottery winnings was buying more and more and more crap. They said that their house was so filled with crap, they couldn't even see the surfaces.
Oh my God. Yep.
Money did not give them more happiness,
No,
certainly.
Definitely not. Definitely.
But let's think, so the total rewards package. Now, if you are looking to work at a place more and more, it's not enough just to have a job. It's about where do you have that job? How do you choose to have autonomy, mastery, and purpose of your time? Mm-hmm. And that's becoming so critical in today's day and age. You can't just force an employee back into the office because you dictate it. Even if you're a gregarious extrovert, you still find that it's really nice to have that time at home just to put your head down, to get things done, to do the laundry so you don't have to do it over the weekend, right?
Yep. Yep. To prep a meal or whatever. Absolutely. Yep.
Exactly. What's interesting is there is research that has shown that a 4-day working week is consistently good for humans who work there, but also for employers. And that, I think, is the really shocking thing that no one expected to come out of the research. I mean, they did it in the UK. I think they had 100 companies they tested it with, and overwhelmingly every element of it was positive. Now, the funny thing is here, we're not just talking about working shorter compressed hours in a 4-day week. We're actually talking about not working 5 days at all.
Yeah.
It kind of makes me wonder what people did for 5 days if we can do it in 4. Yeah. But I certainly know that I will appreciate having autonomy over my own time. That's why I like running my own business. Yeah. I honestly don't know if I could ever go back to work in an office 5 days a week, 9 to 5. I think I'd go mad.
Yeah, so would I. So would I. And it's a really good point. I mean, it's, again, a lot of that is really mindset. It doesn't mean that you'll only work 4 days and then you'll take 3 days off. It just means that because you know that you're not expected to do anything, you might still jump on over the weekend and do a couple of hours because you want to, not because you have to. It's very much a mindset, mindset shift.
Yeah, I think that mindset shift is really important. And when we think about career advancement opportunities, it's not actually just about someone getting a bump in salary. Career advancement can actually mean that it's an opportunity for you to explore different elements, to be recognized for the great things that you do. There are some companies, and you'll know this from your work in the tech space, that actually don't hire people and promote them by giving them more and more and more direct reports. They actually promote them based on their knowledge, their expertise, their niche experience.
And I think give them more training and develop their technical skills more than become managers.
And that's a great way to think about evolving people in a business so that they don't necessarily have to do the traditional, well, I have one direct report, now I've got 3, now I've got 7, I've got 17, I've got 157, therefore my salary goes up appropriately. Well, I'd argue that, in fact, I think I've read that people really can't manage more than 5 to 7 employees effectively anyway. You feel free to disagree with me on that one, Darren. You're the expert in this area.
Some people don't want to be managers. They don't want to manage anybody at all.
Doesn't mean that they aren't experts. Doesn't mean that they don't add enormous value to the company, but they need to be able to see career advancement opportunities for themselves too. Because it doesn't matter if you're an expert. You can sit there doing the same thing day in, day out, and you still don't get the meaning and you still don't get the value unless you can actually find a way of those in doing those 3 things. Now, I'm going to come back to this. I talked about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Now, these are 3 elements that Daniel Pink covers in his book. I think it was To Sell is Human, if I'm not mistaken. Could have been one of his other books. But it's worth drilling into, because autonomy is the ability to be independent. We've seen employees working from home exercising their autonomy muscles. Mastery is the ability to do what you do better, to learn and grow. You were talking about how important it is for organizations to offer careers, career development, training, mentoring, coaching, all of these elements that help people do what they do better. But purpose, I think, is perhaps something that the larger an organization gets, the harder it is find, to define, and to reward people for being true to that purpose. I'm curious on your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, why do people get out of bed in the morning? It's really, why do we get out of bed? What are we going to work to do? And a lot of that comes down to personal growth and professional growth. If we feel that after a year and a half, 2 years, we're not growing, we're not learning, people automatically start looking around.
Contribution to the world, which is actually one of the fourth of the 5 pillars we were talking about. Why are we doing what we're doing?
Yep.
If we're not doing it for money, we're doing it for personal growth. If we're doing it for personal growth, then I would argue that somewhere in there is an altruistic element that is, I don't just want to grow me, I want to grow me because there has to be a reason why we're growing ourselves. Yes, to learn, to contribute, to maybe give back to society, maybe give back to our people, our families.
Yeah.
But arguably at the end of the day, it's just because we don't want to work with that carrot and stick mentality that people worked with when we came out of the industrial era. That's right. The knowledge eras is far, far, far more advanced than we ever were when we began. And of course, the 5th element is culture.
Yes. That's
that old Peter Drucker quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yes, I like that.
The two go hand in hand. People often misquote him thinking that he means that you shouldn't have strategy. It's not true. It just means that you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have a culture that will support the execution of that strategy, you might as well not bother.
Yeah, agree. And a lot of that comes down to leading from the top. The manager, the leader, the owner has to be visible and down in the trenches with his or her troops, and a great example of that is Amazon's founder. God, I've forgotten his name now.
Jeff Bezos, the old one?
Bezos, yes, Jeff Bezos. When he first started, he was down there in the basement with his peers, packing boxes, sending, mailing boxes out to customers for 24 hours, sometimes straight, because things had to be delivered. So you got that kind of leadership is so powerful, rather than people just being in their office with a closed door and nobody ever gets to see them, and they might have a briefing once a week for 5 minutes. That doesn't connect you at all.
It's true. I heard that the new Starbucks CEO spent a lot of time with the employees actually learning to use a coffee machine as a barista. The ironic, here's a point about baristas. Now, this research is quite old. I think it came from a 2016 study. But HubSpot did research with a bunch of CMOs and C-suite executives. And they said, who do you trust more? Now, right at the top there were public servants, and lawyers were way down the bottom. And I don't know where recruiters were. I never checked that one out.
Probably towards the bottom as well.
But baristas were trusted more than marketers.
There you are. I'm not surprised.
The only people I think who were lower were possibly used car salesmen.
I was about to say, no offense to any used car salesman. Absolutely. Yeah. It's, barista is an important function in the world. You go to your barista, they remember your coffee. You don't have to say it 6 times. You're in a rush. It's a very important part of the community.
Especially in Sydney, where people think, I think, have a direct connection to this IV lifeline. Got to get the caffeine dripping through the veins.
That's right. But, coming back to culture, I think a lot of, in the old days, people used to say, oh, we've got a pinball machine in our, we've got a coffee machine, we've got a snack machine, we've got a pool table, we do drinks on Friday night. That's all well and good, but that's not culture. That they're just tricks and perks and, no, it's nothing. Culture is really how you feel, how you make people feel, how you take time to invest in understanding your people, how you grow them, how you train them. All that is culture. And that's, that stuff like that takes a lot of work.
I think culture is a feeling that you get from an organization.
It's a feeling.
And when people do culture well, and this then comes back to the way they do culture as part of their employee value proposition, you can almost peek through the windows and have a look and see what's inside the organization. Now, it's been a long time since I've been involved in an organization where they used marketing as part of their employee value proposition, but I think the two go hand in hand. And often there are tips and tricks and tools and ways of thinking about reaching people through marketing that recruitment, as recruiters, but also as organizations, can benefit from more clearly, which is, who are you talking to? How can you talk to them in a language that resonates with them? And what is it that they're really looking for? Now, the problem is, if you have a large organization and you've got a very diverse set of employees, they're all going to be looking for slightly different things. So what can you hold on to? Well, hopefully you can hold on to that culture, that intangible sense of something. I know I've walked into buildings where the first thing you get in that, and that feeling that you get in the organization is, oh, this is a place I want to work.
Yeah.
And here's a story to illustrate that point. Years ago, I was offered a job at my dream organization. I wanted to go work for Oxford University for years and years and years and years, mostly because I wanted to do a PhD with them. And I assumed that they'd let me do that as part of my, if I was working there, because that's what had happened with the previous organization I worked at. If you were an employee and you wanted to study further, they'd let you, they'd give you discounts, they'd support you through that process. Well, it turns out that the organization where I was offered a job, which was the Said Business School, wanted nothing to do with their academics and their support staff. They were completely separate. And when you walked into the organization, there was this feeling that somehow you as an employee, as a support employee, were less than. You weren't encouraged to talk to the professors. You weren't allowed to go to the lectures. You were somehow a subhuman. It was terrifying. But at the same time, I went to an organization which was a software as a service organization, actually, and arrived a little bit early, sat in their waiting room, and the receptionist was just the most wonderful, wonderful human being.
Beautiful.
He was warm and friendly and engaging and curious and funny and just lovely. And I found over the years that I ended up working with that organization that he had a real gift. And he was the face of the organization. In fact, when they moved buildings, even though he was technically employed by the building management, they actually moved him with the organization as well.
That's a great story. I love that.
I found out years later that he was actually a bit of a predictor. He could look at someone coming into the organization, and because he knew and understood the organizational culture so well, when people walked into that lobby, he could tell whether they would be an organizational fit or not.
And that's a really interesting point, because I've heard people even, speaking to the receptionist to find out what was this person doing before the interview, just to get a sense of how they interacted with everybody when they weren't on show.
Absolutely. This lovely fellow actually said to me, yeah, I always knew you were going to get the job. Like, what? He said, no, you have the right fit. I could tell. It's just, and in fact, some of the heads of the organization, I think it was their head of IT at the time, did go down to Naz and say, hey, Naz, do you think this person's going to get the job or not?
Yep. There you go. Love it. That's so cool. And again, while you're speaking, something that really came to mind is that, as you mentioned, regardless of the role, culture is the glue that holds everybody together. And that's what helps the company to move forward. That's what binds everybody. So you don't want a whole, a list of disjointed employees. You need a unified workforce. And that's what culture does.
It's trite, but it's true. The acronym TEAM, Together Everyone Achieves More, is valid, I think.
100%.
But there has to be a reason that people see themselves as teams. One of the things I cover in the Secret Army, Leadership, Marketing, and the Power of People is the idea of who are you teaming with, and who do you see yourselves as opponents with. And unhealthy organizations actively promote people separating from each other. And I've seen this in toxic cultures where you find that not only are, let's say there's healthy interdepartmental competition.
Yeah.
You might find that the IT department wars with the IS department, for example, because they see themselves as different and meaningful, right? But they're friendly allies, right? They're friendly opponents.
Yeah.
They respect each other, but they still war with each other out of a sense of competition. I think that healthy competition is good for the organization.
Definitely.
But I've seen it on the flip side with toxic cultures where you find that it's not just departments that are warring with each other. It's not just divisions that are warring with each other. You end up creating this culture that is actually so divisive that managers are warring with their employees, that the 2 or 3 levels up, the C-level suite, and you can actually track it right to the top. No one feels safe.
Yeah.
And that lack of safety creates this really, really horrible place to live where, quite frankly, employees feel like a husk.
Yeah.
It's a really dangerous place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to use this phrase because it's been used to death, but I'll do it anyway because it's so pertinent here. That, we hear all the time, people leave managers, they don't leave companies. How you treat your people is everything. Yeah.
So true.
I want to hear more about your book. So let's talk a bit more about your book. Show us your book.
Well, it's a lovely segue into that, actually, because one of the chapters in The Secret Army, The Power of People, Leadership Marketing and the Power of People, is actually about the managers. And the book is almost a manifesto about what great leadership is and what bad management isn't.
Hi, guys. Just a quick message. I'm always on the lookout for engineers in the managed services space across Australia. Support engineers, systems engineers, network engineers, and solution consultants. I only work with the best companies that are going places, really value their staff, have great techs, and offer stacks of training and other benefits, up to $1,000 for successful referrals. Who do you know? Feel free to give me a buzz, 0414 659 800. But right now, back to the conversation. And actually, before we get into that, what drove you to write this book?
Oh, that's a lovely story. I wrote a fiction novel. And for years, I talked about, I'm going to get it published. I'm going to get it published. And for years, I did nothing about getting it published. Because my intention was not actually to get the book published. My intention was simply to write the book.
Yeah.
And eventually, after I think about 3 years of talking about maybe one day getting it published, my husband actually said to me, Gina, I'm done. I love you and I will support you, but it's been 3 years of you talking about this and doing nothing on it. I forbid you from ever talking to me about your book again. I'm over it. Sorry, I'm done.
Love it.
So I wrote another one.
Great. So you got another 3 years.
So I wrote this one with the intention of publishing it. And so back in the day, before self-publishing was a big deal, it was quite a hard thing to actually get a book to be self-published. And 6 years ago, I published this because I had to. I felt compelled to talk about what was going wrong in organizations from a personal, anecdotal perspective. And you'll see that the chapters aren't just about leadership. They are about humanity. And marketing is in there because anyone who understands the psychology of human behavior realizes that marketing isn't just about what you show to the outside world. Marketing is very, very much about what you show to your employees. And it's about that culture that we talked about. It's that intangible feeling. Well, actually, the feeling is not intangible. The feeling is tangible. You can touch it. You can't see it, but you know that it's there when organizations do it right. And so if I come back to the point I was trying to make earlier about why do we want to talk about employees and what's right about employees, there are, in fact, guerrilla leaders in organizations.
Guerrilla leaders, that's a new term. What does that mean?
Well, if you think about it, guerrilla as in war, as in Guerre, not guerrilla as in thug, thump, thump, me, Tarzan, you, Jane, not that kind of guerrilla. Guerrilla leaders are those who are leaders without portfolio or leaders without permission. And what often happens is guerrilla leaders express the essence of what the company means to them. They believe in the purpose that they were hired to achieve. They believe in the values that the organization espouses.
Yep.
And what happens more often than not is, especially in toxic workplace cultures, guerrilla leaders identify that they have to do something different, but they have to do it without permission.
Mm.
And so they end up ironically driving their part of the organization forward. And that may be, an entire division that they're driving forward. It may simply be the 5 or 6 people who sit in their team. What they do as part of that process is they create a safe space that allows their employees to feel like they are part of a team, that they are glued together for some kind of meaning and purpose.
Right.
But the reason they're guerrilla leaders is because more often than not, guerrilla leadership happens in contexts where organizations claim they have a purpose, but they actually aren't living that purpose. They've stepped so far away from their original purpose that they've created a toxic workplace culture instead. And guerrilla leaders have to save and protect as much as they can to be able to strive forward. And I've known several guerrilla leaders in my time, and more often than not, they've been promoted, even though they have deliberately not done what the organization has told them to do, because they've done what was right for their employees, for their customers, and ultimately for their business.
And why do you think these guerrilla leaders go about this process instead of just saying, forget it, I'll get another job?
I think they care. I think they really care about something. It might be they care about their customers. It might be they care about their employees. It might be they care about the work that they actually do because they really, really love their job. But I think they also realize that you can lay down and wait for things to wash over you and live your life in resignation, or you can take a stand. And I think more often than not, guerrilla leaders do it because they can't handle lying down anymore.
Right. Yep. Yep. And that's real leadership when you think about it. That's real expression of leadership.
Mm.
Love it. And so how have you structured the book, or how have you broken down the book?
Well, you can have a look on Amazon and you can take a look inside and you can see all of the chapters. But it's in 4 sections, basically.
Okay.
Well, first of all, we talk about the secret army. So who are the people in your secret army? And spoiler alert, that is you as your leaders, that is your employees, and that is your customers.
Yeah.
That's the key element of your secret army.
Love that.
And it is effectively a weapon of mass destruction or a weapon for mass success. And that is where marketing, of course, comes in.
Right.
And then we look in section 2 as, are you leading forwards or sideways? And this effectively comes down to self-leadership and how that self-leadership translates into the context in which you are working or leading. Nice. And let's not forget that you can be a leader outside of work too. Just because you don't have a portfolio or a job title that says you're allowed to be a leader doesn't mean you can't be one.
Yep. You can be a leader in your family. You can be a leader in your community. You can be a leader in amongst your friends. You can be a leader in any capacity.
Absolutely. Section 3 is about the secret resources that great leaders use. And I have to say, this is probably one of my favorite sections because we talk about truth tellers, the people who actually know what they know, but you can't hear that from them unless you give them an opportunity to speak. And in an IT context, this is more pertinent than anything else, really, because often your truth tellers are those who observe enormous amounts of information, but don't spurt it out. This is often introverts.
Yeah.
They spend more time listening than they do speaking. So you need to be able to make sure that you hear them. Yeah. We talked about guerrilla leaders. Frustrated storytellers is one of the other elements. People who have a story to tell, they just don't know where or how to tell them. And undiscovered idea generators, which of course is also pertinent to listening and giving employees the opportunity to do their best work in a context that allows them to be extraordinary, to really make the most of their skills and talents. And lastly, it's a model for intercompany integration. So who are the hidden influences? How do you make change happen? What happens with relationships and chameleons, people who change who they are depending on the circumstance to achieve something better? Now, of course, I didn't turn the chapter over. It's been so long since I last read the book that I forgot about section 5, which is about the marketers and the salespeople. Now, this is partly why this book is not always as popular for as many leaders as it should be. They get kind of burdened by the title of marketing. Ignore marketing. Marketing has almost nothing to do with the idea of people and power and leadership and making change happen and inspiring people. But it is important to see how marketing contributes to that. And so there's a last section here, which is dedicated to fun things like marketing striptease and the voice of your customer. So the question is, are you actually listening? And one of my favorite elements comes from a blog post, in fact, that I wrote many, many years ago, which is about relationship counseling for sales and marketing.
Relationship counseling for sales and marketing. I love it. That is great, because there's always that divide between sales and marketing, but these days they should be merging more and more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a fellow by the name of Dan Tyre, who I think was the 6th employee at HubSpot, which is a multi-million-dollar business these days. And Dan likes to say that he coined the phrase smarketing, which is basically sales and marketing put together.
Love it.
But to hear him talk, even a few years ago, he was saying, if you want to make your business work, no apologies to any salespeople on the call or listening in here, you need to get rid of your salespeople and convert them all into marketers. I'm not sure I believe in that, because I think that sales and marketing are complementary skills.
Yes.
But I do think the marketing overlap means that you cannot see salespeople and marketers as opponents in a relationship anymore.
No.
They have to be part and part of a single vision, which is to attract and retain that customer. Because when it's easy to acquire customers, relatively speaking, and that's where marketers excel. But what happens once you've got the customers? How do you keep in touch with them, and how do you make sure that they keep giving?
Yep.
One of my favorite elements of content marketing is being able to use customer stories and customer voices in marketing. And it's surprising how few people do this well, consistently, and with maximum distribution.
Agree. Yep.
Because if you think about it, your employee value proposition could also include happy customer stories and testimonials and quotes. Because who doesn't want to work for an organization that has happy customers? Quite frankly, everyone should.
Yep.
But how do you get those stories? Well, the problem is that marketing seems to think that they are solely responsible for getting these stories, when in fact, they usually have very little contact with the customers at the end of the day. And so when we talk about value and we talk about consistency and coherence across the whole organization, if you have happy customers, you have people who talk to those customers, you have marketers who talk to the people who talk to those customers, all of a sudden it becomes a big, beautiful circle.
Yes.
You're no longer just acquiring customers ad infinitum. Yeah. You're acquiring customers, you're maintaining that relationship, you're nurturing that relationship. And then you're asking them, what do you love about us? Yeah. And then all of a sudden, as if by magic, which of course it isn't, it's just good planning, you pop those happy customer stories back into the beginning, where you're looking at marketing all the way over again.
Love it.
And
I'm
when
glad,
that
I'm glad
works,
you said that, because I was still trying to make that link between marketing, culture, and employee value proposition. And that's exactly what it is.
It becomes what HubSpot calls a flywheel.
Yep.
They originally looked at marketing separate from the CRM, which was separate from the sales function, which was separate from the service function. Yep. And then a few years ago, they decided to turn it into a flywheel and put the customer right at the center. And what happens with a flywheel, which is not that familiar to us English-speaking English people, as opposed to Americanese, a flywheel is almost like, if you think about a bicycle spoke, like when you turn a bicycle wheel on the outside, did you ever have those spokes as a kid where they had like little plastic beads on it? And as you turned the bicycle wheel, it would go clack, 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 slowly. Yep. But when you went fast, what happened was the centrifugal force pulled all of those beads into the center, and you couldn't even hear them going around anymore because they didn't. So if you think that your customer is the center, your organization spins faster and faster around the edges because you're so customer centric that you're all able to contribute towards that success. And therefore the success begets the success. Your employee value proposition allows you to focus on your customers, and it allows marketing to tell those beautiful stories in a way that attracts more customers.
And employees as well.
And employees. because they want to
Beautiful.
do it, because it's meaningful, because their customers are happy. It's a no-brainer.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Fantastic. And so, Gina, I want to talk a bit more about your TED Talk as well. So tell us a bit about that. What was that experience like?
So my TED Talk is called Marketing in the Era of Authenticity.
I like that.
But it's got a little bit of a caveat at the beginning.
Okay.
Confessions of a Liar, Marketing in the Era of Authenticity.
Oh, okay.
And I changed that at the very last minute. Originally, the title was actually going to be Why Now is the Best Time in History to Be in Marketing. And it is, because you have more visibility, you have more ability to touch your audience, you have more clarity on how your marketing campaigns work, what is and isn't working, not complete clarity, but more.
Definitely.
But the reason that I changed it to be Confessions of a Liar is because I thought all marketers were liars. In fact, Seth Godin wrote a book with this subject as the title.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
The book is called All Marketers Are Liars, but it's crossed out at the end. And it's actually called All Marketers Tell Stories.
Love it.
And this is kind of the challenge that people have. We think that marketing is not trustworthy. We think that marketers are liars. We think that marketing is synonymous with advertising. That's not true.
It can be very different. Can be very
marketing
different. Doesn't always, it's not always the case, but it can be.
And this is the difference between marketing in the era of authenticity.
Yep.
Anyone can make claims about their products or their services and put them out on the internet and get away with it for a certain period of time. Or at least they could in the days before social media.
That's right.
And then everything changed. And I like to think that this democratization of information has helped organizations get more direct feedback from their audience more quickly.
Yep.
Of course, it's a double-edged sword. Social media is not always wonderful.
Agree.
But it does mean that when companies are listening, and the same goes for their employees as much as it does for their marketing, if they're listening and they genuinely are listening to understand and to make change happen, then something almost magical, almost beautiful happens. And this is what I talk about in the TEDx talk. When marketers create marketing that is meaningful, beautiful, human, engaging, inspiring, it's almost impossible not to love what they're talking about, as long as it's authentic.
Yep, so true.
And that was the big difference between the company that just produces something because they think it's good to produce, and a company that produces something because they've listened and they understand what their audience wants and they want to help their audience achieve something greater.
Yeah.
I think when that happens, it is the best time in history to be in marketing.
Oh, I agree. Absolutely. I mean, nowadays, the scale and the reach of communication and of your message is infinite. But again, it only works if it's authentic and if you've got a good story to tell about why you're doing it in the first place.
You say that your reach is infinite. Not quite infinite, but it has far more potential than it did. But let's come to another misapprehension that a lot of people have about marketing. A lot of people think that if you have a good story to tell and you put it out there, that it will reach people. You know, if you build it, they will come, that kind of concept. It doesn't work like that, sadly.
Okay.
One of the hardest things to do in marketing, and something that I think marketers are massively undervalued about, is the amplification of messages. You can have a beautiful story and you can put it up on your website, but if you're not making sure that the right people are coming to you, it doesn't help.
Yeah. This is all about target audience and, you know, making sure that your message is reaching the right people.
You got it.
That's what it's all about. And again, that's part of marketing. Before you even start to put a marketing campaign, you have to work out who you're campaigning to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Very true. And was it how long did TED Talks go for these days? 12 or 14 minutes or something like that?
There have to be longer than 18 minutes. I think mine was 17 and a half. But I tell you what, that is the most preparation I've ever done for talk. I think I did 50 hours of rehearsal for 17 minutes of talking, and it was worth it, and it was necessary.
Yep.
And it was worth every second. And I'm so grateful. So glad that I did it.
How does one do a TED Talk? Do they invite you or do you apply? How does it work?
It depends on where you are in the world.
Okay.
To be clear, it's a TEDx talk, which is an independently run TED event. TED, as the organization itself, unless you've got billions of followers or something so extraordinary about your story, they're unlikely to invite you up on stage. But they do have allowed the TEDx events to be run independently. So normally what will happen, and I've tried checking this out in Australia, is you'll go through rounds and rounds and rounds of editing processes. You'll submit an application. Sometimes you'll submit a video application. Then you'll go into the panel of experts who will choose your talk or not choose your talk. They'll ask you to do the preparation. They'll do the presentation before they even choose you to go up on the stage.
God.
And then only are you selected to be on stage.
So this is a serious process.
It's a serious thing. It wasn't for me because, like with a lot of things, once I've decided I want to make something happen, I find a way to cut through the noise and to get directly to that result. And so I thought, I want to do a TED Speak. And so I looked it up and realized that actually there's this thing called TEDx, and there was a TEDx happening 8 miles down the road from me. So that's 15 kilometers for those of us who think in kilometers. And I reached out to the organizer and I said, what's happening? Have you got all the people that you need? And he said, no, we could probably do with some more. What do you want to talk about? I said, oh, this is what I want to talk about. He said, well, I need to know what you're actually going to say. So I sat down one evening, literally wrote the entire speech. I think it was about 4 pages of content. Obviously it was very different by the time I'd finally performed it. Wrote it, emailed it to him and said, what do you think? He said, you're in.
That was it.
That was it.
Oh my God, how great is that?
So there's the, how do you do a TEDx talk? And then how does Gina do a TEDx talk? And the two are very different. And this seems to be the story of my life.
Your way is the better way.
I don't know. My way is the, I like to think of it as cheating. It's not cheating because it's authentic, right?
Really?
It's just finding.
Strategy. It's clever.
It's finding a simpler route.
Yeah.
I'll take that. Strategy, clever, yes.
Strategy.
Not just lazy.
It's not just I'll go through. It's not just I'll follow the process, blindly. It's how can I think outside the box? How do I cut through this noise? Yeah. Which is what marketing is all about as well.
You got it.
There you go. Love it. Now, so Gina, I want to talk a bit about your company, Verbalistics. Tell us a bit more about that. How you work, how can people work with you, all that kind of stuff.
Verbalistics is actually a portmanteau, which is a fancy way of saying 2 words shoved together.
Right.
Verbal plus ballistics.
Ballistics. Okay, cool.
Making your words go mental.
I love that.
And if you think about it, that's what marketing should do. Marketing should be able to take your words, extract those meaning, and put that out into a way that makes change happen.
Nice.
How do people work with me? Quite frankly, they simply reach out directly. Get hold of me via LinkedIn is the best way. But what can I do to help them? I work for B2B organizations, predominantly those who are in software as a service, or those who actually consult in order to make change happen.
Right.
And what I do is I help them identify, or rather they usually identify the stories they want telling first. And they say, hey, Gina, we need some help with this. Right. And we create a partnership so that I understand what makes their organization special. And then how can we create content marketing that allows their intended audience to understand that very, very deeply. Now, the execution of this may be as simple as a 1,200 character LinkedIn post, or it may be a 900 word blog post, or it may be an 18,000 word, massive piece of content. But at the end of the day, it's all about, hey, help me cut through the noise in a way that connects the hearts and minds of my company with the hearts and minds of the people who want to buy what I have to sell. And of course, content marketing comes with not just the production of content, but the distribution and the amplification of that content.
I love that.
There are lots and lots and lots
of that content. It's a really important point.
Yeah, there are lots of content marketers out there who can simply produce content.
Yeah.
But I've sat in the seat of marketing directors, and I know how hard it is to produce campaigns.
Yeah.
And the great marketers understand that when clarity comes right from the beginning, the execution is much more interesting. There is one factor that I do slightly differently to other content marketers, which is why I sit at board level, which is why I coach marketers. It's why I actually help people think bigger, not just about, how many tweets are we going to send out, but how does this fit into our context of everything else? And what do we need to change at an organizational level to make that happen? If they want that advice, of course, because not all marketers do. Some feel deeply threatened by external consultants.
That's right.
The really exciting part for me is to be able to have open and honest conversations about what's going on in their organizations. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, I become an extended part of the team. So we're looking at how we can solve those problems together. And then there's almost an element of intuition. When you deeply understand that audience and their pain points, you can start creating content that transcends words. Like, how ridiculous is that, right? Because they're reading it. So how could it transcend words? But actually what you're doing is you are helping people get the feeling. Yes.
It's about emotion.
Yes. And any great, truly great content writer will stand the test of time despite generative AI like ChatGPT, because they can do something extraordinary. And that extraordinary thing is connecting human beings to each other through the power of words.
As long as the audience is, and the end audience is a human, there'll always be a place for that.
That's a fair point.
That's right. And do you get involved in the execution of that, or you just stay more in the production of that?
I have in the past got involved in execution, but it is a specific and challenging skill in and of itself. Yep. Marketers do campaigns extremely well. They understand how to reach their audience very well. We complement each other beautifully. As long as we can have the high level discussions about where are you going and how are you getting there, I can help them create the ways of reaching that audience, and they can make sure that they do the reach for the audience. It's been a challenge for me for many years because marketing requires all of these skills. It is such a diverse industry.
Absolutely, it is.
But no one, and I genuinely believe this, no one can be an expert in every single aspect. We can be bloody good at most of them.
Yep, especially nowadays, because the channels are just, the avenues are growing daily. You can't even keep on top of it all.
Yeah, but no one can be an expert in every single element. And so I choose to be an expert in the emotion and the communication and the context and the connecting of the dots. Yep. And let other marketers make sure that those dots are in fact connected. It's a hard job, and hats off to them, but I'm not going to do that myself.
Well done. I love it. So true. So true. Well, that was Gina. It's been an absolute pleasure. We've covered a lot of ground, and it's been fascinating. And I think, the audience will get a lot of information and a lot of insight out of this. So I also urge everybody to take a look at your TED Talk, take a look at your book. Is your book in audio version as well, or just written?
Sadly not. If you want to read it in audio, call me and I'll read it out to you over the phone.
Yeah, I love audiobooks. Are you planning on doing that one day?
Perhaps. But I think by the time I get around to recording it on audiobook, I think I might actually just write a new one and record that instead.
There's at least another 3 years you can talk to your husband about the audio. You can get another 3 years out of it. Well done. But it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show. I'm going to put all those links in the show notes for everybody to find you. If they want to find you and chat to you, just talk to you on LinkedIn. Is that the best way?
That's absolutely the best way. I'm there probably too much. I love LinkedIn, but it's a great way of reaching out to people and having conversations and getting to know them a little bit better.
I think that's how we found each other as well.
It was indeed.
So LinkedIn is very powerful.
So before we go, you do ask if there are any quick tips or takeaways.
Yes, that was my next question.
I preempted you. I'm sorry.
You got it. You can go for it.
I think the tips I would leave leaders with are get to know your people and find out what makes them excited, and then give the opportunity to let them do that thing that makes them come alive within the job context. Sometimes that means moving the job. Sometimes it means shifting to a different part of the organization. Sometimes it means allowing people the opportunity to do something that wasn't part of your plan.
Yep.
But I genuinely believe that if you've hired someone because you have a good fit with the organization, let them do what makes them come alive.
Nurture that.
It'll make your organization better. No question.
100%.
Yeah. If I can leave a tip for communication, it is this: be more willing to be vulnerable when you communicate. People are far more forgiving than anyone would expect.
Yeah.
And they are far more interested in what goes beneath the surface than they are about the fluff that sits on top.
And I'll throw in a quick quote. I read, or I listened to a podcast, I think, and I heard this quote. I don't know who said it, but it said, "Connections are formed in the cracks." And I just love that.
That's so beautiful. It makes me think of the Japanese art of kintsugi, which is repairing broken pottery with gold.
Yes. I've heard of that. Yep.
And if the connections are made in the cracks, what happens is that you actually build a more beautiful and stronger relationship when things are broken.
Yeah.
And I know that's certainly
when you're vulnerable, you show your authentic self.
Yeah. From a customer perspective, if things go wrong and you fix it, you are all vulnerable and authentic during that process. And it means you can build stronger customer advocacy relationships.
Yeah.
And with employees, if you're honest about what's going on, but you can find a way to achieve what everyone wants moving forward, I think you stand a much better chance of keeping employees engaged and therefore building a better business off the back of that.
Yep, so true. And I think just to finish off, there's like not enough people that sit down regularly with their employees, with their team, and just say, "How are you doing? How's it all going? Are you happy? Anything that, we have overlooked? Anything that you would like to achieve in the next 6 to 12 months?" Just that alone will create a retention like nothing else. So I think so simple.
We are all humans, and what humans like more than anything else, even if they are introverts, is to be truly deeply heard.
Yep, that's true. That's what gets us out of bed in the morning. Well, Gina, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's really been a lovely chat. I think we've covered a lot of ground. Everybody out there, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Feel free to reach out to Gina, and we'll see you very, very soon for another episode of Soul Searching, the Soul Recruitment Podcast. Thanks again, Gina.
Thanks for having me. It's been my pleasure, Darren.
All right, pleasure. Thanks again for joining me for another episode of Soul Searching, the Soul Recruitment Podcast. If you'd like to join me as a guest on the show, I would be delighted to collaborate. Feel free to buzz me on 0414 659 800 or email me on darren@soulrecruitment.com.au. I'm always on the lookout for great guests who can share their stories and expertise with my community. But for now, though, have a fantastic day, and I'll see you next time.